Governance is different, or government is different from politics. Government is the administration of power, or the management of power, or the management of process. But politics generally is not just about formal processes, there's also a process of influence.
As the supreme law of the land, the Constitution is the document, the framing network of ideas under which every other action has to happen. The Constitutional Court is the final arbiter on interpreting the Constitution.
If you're thinking of a mature way of organizing towards social justice, the Constitution and the available legislative rights, the laws that have been developed since the end of apartheid are crucial. And they're like the crux or cornerstones of why we live and we perform our activism today. And therefore the Constitution and the laws that exist for South African schools are critical and a big part of how we show that activism.
How do you stop, as a social justice organization, this cycle and balance the interests of the individual who's been impacted by this broken health system, who's lost their life, the lives of their loved one, a future, with broader systemic reform, and to fix the structural changes that are causing this damage and this harm and impacting mainly poor and marginalized people's lives?
Every solution that we offer to somebody in a situation of dire need has to contain the issue of dignity. So as a solution that speaks to restoring the dignity of the individual. So you might ask, why dignity? And I think it's unfortunate, but it's true that the materially poor are often viewed as inferior in worth to those who are materially wealthy. And then this generally leads to further neglect and even exploitation and continued mistreatment. And this prejudice against the poor sadly also manifests itself when those with good intentions view poor as objects of poverty that needs to be saved by charitable gestures. And so the inability to see the true capacity of the poor is often a barrier to effective and sustainable poverty reduction programs.
We submit a policy document to Parliament or to a government department. We make sure the public knows about it. We mount a campaign. We make it as public as we can do. And the reason for that is to engage the public in doing what we're doing. Because as far as we're concerned, there is no fighting corruption without mobilizing public opinion against it.
Empowering accountability to do the kind of work on the scale that is required is just huge. What we are doing, and I think Corruption Watch has been the forefront of that kind of work, scratches the surface. So we get some cases, we make a big noise out of it, as David says, you create the ripples, and you hope that this will get the necessary attention. But it drains us, it drains our resources, and it comes back to ultimately re-looking at our electoral systems, re-looking at how we engage with people who we entrust into office, and what are the simple things we can do to begin at a very local level, start building those centers of accountability.
When we talk about media freedom, we are talking about your rights. I think there's been this separation of the two, where the media is one thing and then the public is the other. Your right to know is where media freedom is, because it is the media that allows you to know. And the defending that section 16 of the Constitution shouldn't be the work of just journalists, shouldn't be the work of just the South African National Editors Forum or FXI. It should be all of us' responsibility, because once we do not have media freedom, your right to know is taken away from you.
Of course, media has to ensure that it does its job well. And I think that we should never ever stop promoting excellence and quality journalism. That remains a priority. But we also have to be very vigilant about the tone and the hidden meaning often coming out of what politicians are saying.
There are certain judgments that sometimes come to the fore in the courts that seems to open up space for pressure to be put on journalists to reveal sources. And we look for opportunities in terms of other cases to make sure that those arguments against or for the protection of sources when it comes to journalists are protected. And one of the issues that we are working on is the repealing of criminal defamation, which is something that worldwide is supposed to be gotten rid of, but in South Africa we still maintain it, and that places a lot of pressure on journalists because people can serve sentences and can have criminal records because of what is called criminal defamation. So that's work in progress as well.
We cannot wait for always jobs to be given to you on a plate. But these are a few things which structurally, I think South Africa is still grappling with, and primarily because I think the government refuses to acknowledge that we are a developing country where our means of investment should be to create employment.
Ours is a mixed economy. So you have private households, private individuals, businesses making decisions about how to spend their money, how to spend their time, and also what to produce. Then you also have government, which then also makes decisions about the framework in which all of those activities are taking place, largely so setting the rules of the game. But also for certain activities, government itself producing and providing goods and services. So if you think about electricity, we still have a state monopoly that does that, and a small growing private sector that's emerging only now.
If we think differently beyond just a narrow paradigm of decent work or formal jobs, and much more creatively around how do we create sustainable livelihoods for people, or the opportunities, how do we open up those opportunities, we could achieve a lot more, I believe.
Particularly in South Africa, what it also did was to also entrench inequality along race, class, and gender lines, and eventually, over time, widen the gap between the rich and poor. So in South Africa, the roots of inequality are deeply linked to the past that we've had as a country. And whilst we cannot, undo the history that we've had as a country, I think it's important for us to sort of recognize and understand that history has an important role to play, particularly one of a history which is steeped in slavery, in dispossession, brutal wars, which have also further inculcated the structures of inequality and poverty which we see today.
Section 27 gives us all the right to food, to water. Section 26 gives you the right to shelter, so that's housing, healthcare, social security. Basically, all our needs should be met. But then the constitutional writers said that the state didn't have to give that to everybody immediately, but through progressive realization based on available resources, which is where the taxation comes in as well. So one of the things that we at SPI did was to say, but some of these things have not been shifting. In the 2000s, government got into, or still 2000, in the early 2000s, government got into this whole habit of talking about the poorest of the poor. Like only the poorest of the poor should get anything. So basically targeting, taking away people's rights, in effect.
So in South African law, there's a kind of definition of corruption in terms of the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Practices Act of 2004, which basically has two elements, right? So it basically says that corruption is an attempted or actual exchange of a gratification, a benefit of some kind, for the irregular performance of a duty arising out of a legal obligation. Some features of that is that it kind of focuses, it zeroes in on what we might call bribery. It applies both in the public sector and the private sector.
For me, I appreciated it because he forced me to go and look up very specific cases and instances of injustice and try to quantify the impact that they have. instead of just making broad sweep in the social sciences, we make broad sweeping statements about general impact, that there's just general inequality, but not speaking to the numbers or the individual cases. Because when someone is going to listen to you about social justice, they're going to want to know how big is the impact.
That visit to Constitutional Hill was an emotional experience in the sense that we positioned ourselves in relation to the history that has shaped us, the past that has textured our lives, but also the struggle that is up ahead and the baton that we have to take on for future generations.